Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this Academy of Management annual meeting, OMT Division Awards interview. In this video, I'm going to be interviewing Harsh Ketkar, Seth Carnahan, and Brad Greenwood, the winners of the Responsible Research Award, about their paper, Adaptable Tools and Women's Job Performance in Male-Dominated Fields, Evidence from Robotic Surgery. I'd like to start by thanking the authors for their time and giving me a few minutes for this interview to share their insights, as well as any advice that they have for other scholars looking to develop responsible research, and to congratulate them again for winning this incredible award. All right, on to the interview.
So to go ahead and start, if you could please just give us a little overview of the paper and the findings.
Sure. So the basic thing that we started off with was with this. There is a lot of research about how workplaces might make themselves more gender inclusive. So we have this broad literature on so policy levers that firms employ to make workplaces more inclusive, but very little of this work focuses on the material environment, the tools and technology used. And I think, we think this is a big blind spot because men and women on average have some differences in their physical characteristics, for instance, height. So workplaces where the material environment is built with men in mind will create barriers for women's success in these workplaces. So a very common example of this is that in offices you have air conditioning set to really low temperatures, and the reason, so these are temperatures designed for the average man who tend to have more muscle content, or or simply they tend to wear suits, right? So it's not hot for them. And it's just too cold for women. I'm sure you must have experienced this.
I have a blanket right now.
Yeah. Yes, and I mean there is some work which says that these uncomfortable temperatures are an irritant, and these are barriers for success in the workplace. And you can see more broadly how this leads to a reinforcing cycle of disadvantage, right? So more broadly, this is just an example, temperatures, but more broadly, you'll see the workplace is mostly designed for men. So, there are a lot of barriers for women to perform well in these contexts. So few women enter. Because few women enter, it's over. Workplaces have a majority of men, and few changes take place to allow women to succeed. So few women enter, and so on and so forth. So there is this reinforcing cycle, right? And so we were wondering, how could we break this cycle? So we contend that this cycle can be broken if certain new technologies arrive, which are more adaptable in nature to specific needs. And probably in this case, which require less force to operate. Now, many times these technologies might be intended to help men do their jobs better, but they might have the side effect of helping women succeed in those workplaces. Or, these could be neutral technologies, which are generally better. So we study one such example, that is robotic surgery. So robotic laparoscopic surgery, that is robotic. So you have the Da Vinci suite, for instance. So now 80% of laparoscopy surgeons are men. And the tools that you see, they are one size fits all, or more accurately, one size fits average sized man, right? And these are not easy to use. They are very heavy. You need a lot of grip strength. They are very uncomfortable. But more so, it's truer for women because there is this long line of literature or long line of papers in medicine which say that female surgeons experience more pain and discomfort compared to their male colleagues when they are using laparoscopic tools. And so we wondered if surgical robots, which replace these typical surgical tools with something akin, something which is much more ergonomically neutral or more adaptable to different people, something like a video game setup with a joystick, might help women surgeons' performance more than men's, because they get rid of these old one-size-fit-all fits all tools and replace them with an adjustable console. And we find that that's indeed the case. So women actually experience about twice the surgical performance improvement that men do when they use the robot versus when they use standard tools. So we try to get at this mechanism in greater detail, which helps us conclude that ergonomics is an important mechanism behind this relationship. So, for instance, in surgical fields where these fields which have more men, there is a greater proportion of men surgeons in those surgical subfields, we find that this effect is stronger. Or for instance, it's stronger for busier surgeons because they tend to experience more pain. So, and then there could be other downstream implications related to turnover, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, it's super interesting. Like we talk about thinking of it from a kind of an equalizing the playing field standpoint and an equity standpoint, but also just the performance implications, right? When you're thinking about how sort of these different people are evaluated and the biases that may be sort of inherent in the evaluations, the structure that creates performance outcomes. So yeah, it's super interesting. Thank you. So you said you noticed that there was this sort of lack of study in this area. How did you come to find this, or what kind of prompted your interest in this area? Where did the idea sort of originate?
So there is a large body of work on socio-materiality and gender in technology in particular. So this is all classic work from the 90s, 70s, 80s, and very conceptual in nature, which, so this is from the science and technology study literature, most by Pinch and Biker and Bachman, etc. And essentially, they contend that technology in itself is gendered because most tools are designed to be user-friendly to men. And you'll find this to be most salient with physical tools, right? And there has been some exploration about this at the societal level, more broadly. So there is an excellent recent book, Invisible Women, by Caroline Criado Perez, and she does a wonderful job of documenting different examples of this around us. It's a very recent book, I think 2019 or so. And so we wondered about the different implications of this phenomenon for men and women participating within organizations and professions. So these ideas about gender technology and its effect on society, these ideas were floating around broadly for a long time, but we didn't find a lot of development within management literature in particular. And so we thought that using the context of surgeons doing robot and standard laparoscopies would be interesting and would be great, very well suited, because this is a profession which is skill intensive. So this is not this is not exactly agriculture or a thing. It's skill intensive. It's an important profession. Of course, agriculture is important, but there is also a lot of data. So we had access to highly detailed micro data from patient admissions in Florida. And that's when we decided to start working on this paper. So later on, as we progressed, as we analyzed the data, we also thought that to gain a richer understanding of what exactly was going on in this context, because none of us are medical doctors, right? So to gain an intuitive feel of what exactly is going on, so we decided to interview men and women surgeons, which was very, very enlightening, and as well as surgical robot design engineers. So what exactly goes on when they were designing robots, these surgical robots, that is. So that's how the project developed.
Thanks. Certainly an interesting context. I'm sure you guys got to learn a lot about the phenomenon, but also just what it's like to operate in sort of the medical setting. You shared a little bit about the implications for sort of the social materiality. Could you share a little bit more about the implications for our understanding of in-group biases and how sort of in-group bias plays into all of this?
Yeah, so something that popped out for me, and I mean, Seth and Brad, please do add also as well, but something that personally was it was something that made me uncomfortable, was this idea of this self-reinforcing cycle, where, these material conditions determine, well, basically they are determined by which is the dominant demographic, usually men. And, if you ask the designers, if you ask the people in the profession, they are going to, the designers especially, they are going to say that we are going to cater to the dominant demographic. Like, they are our audience. They are the people who are going to use our tools. But we need to cater to their needs. And that sounds logical, but when you see what it leads to, right? I mean, it doesn't seem right? It makes you inherently uncomfortable that, everybody seems to be right, but something is not right. And so this reinforcement cycle where, technology is shaped by the dominant group and it gradually pushes out the minority group outside by reducing their chances of success, that was unsettling for me. And this is the key learning that I had. But on the other side, we also saw technological shocks, as we see in our context, surgical robots, as something that introduced an impetus for change. So introduction of new tools, which are generally good, right? Technological progress, which is generally good for everyone. And these are introduced not to correct this injustice or these barriers, but it is to increase performance for everyone. But these end up being more beneficial to a minority group in the profession or in the workplace. So adaptable technology, in our case, which is good for everyone, helps level the playing field for men and women within organizations. So these were the two key learnings for theorizing about this.
So it sounds like that's kind of your big what's next, right? If we were to advise sort of in practice, what do we do with this? It sounds like sort of the integration of these more adaptable tools and these new technologies. Where do you think we should move on the academic side from here? What's sort of next?
Yeah, so firstly, I mean, the simple answer is that, more, especially in management, we need to focus more on socio-materiality and gender, to focus more on sex and gender in these fields, about how technology interacts with these issues. So, of course, there is, as I mentioned, there's a lot of work about this in sociology and science and technology studies, but very few management scholars use this work. It is a huge and important research opportunity. I personally think we are just scratching the surface. It's like the first study I know of, or one of the first studies, which is looking at this issue. More broadly, I mean, since we are talking about research impact as well, right? Responsible research. So more broadly, I think beyond academia, I think if we are able to, we would be really happy if we are able to encourage hospitals to prioritize female surgeons in the training and use of robots, because clearly there are also barriers to accessing training. So there's some recent work about surgical robots by Matt Bean, which says that. And, based on our conversations with female surgeons, many of them already know that robots are easier for them to use. But so that's, we also hope that, even beyond hospitals, other organizations will also consider how the material environment or the technologies and tools that they use will make their organization unwelcoming to women, and how to correct them.
Awesome.
Harsh, can I drop in just for a second? Because I think you said something that's really important that I agree with, which is that, canonically we think about technology as a great equalizer, right? Because you're removing the physicality of the execution of a series of tasks. And I think what the paper highlights is that there's a series of assumptions that go into that, often which have a central or focal group in mind. And in this case, we're showing that women are specifically disadvantaged, but I think what the work more broadly calls for in the management space is re-examining this tacit assumption of equalizing for all persons, right? So it's like, are there different socio-technological uses or socio-ethnographic uses of individual pieces of technology which are different across groups? And trying to dig into the assumptions behind the design of individual tools, because if we dig into them and they're warranted, well, that's great. But if we dig into them and they're not warranted, well, that's a problem. And I think we're highlighting how customization can begin to resolve some of those things by ameliorating the underlying and often tacit assumptions that go into technology design.
Yeah, I second that. Yeah, I completely agree with Brad on that.
I think that's a really great point. I think that's sort of the call we're seeing across the academy, right? When we talk about responsible research and we talk about kind of looking at these outcomes and saying like, well, is this an outcome in name or is this an outcome in practice? What do we mean when we say sort of equity and diversity, and are we actually achieving those things, or does it just sort of look like that on the surface? So I think that's a really great addition. Thank you. I also wanted to ask kind of what you found to be the most challenging part of developing this paper, and how you overcame that, or if looking back, you would have done anything differently.
Yeah, so the first thing was finding women surgeons to interview. So, I mean, it was a recurrent reminder of how male-dominated our context was. So 80% of the surgeons are male. So just to reach out to them and finding enough women surgeons to talk about their experiences was challenging. Apart from that, I mean, learning and going through the entire socio-materiality literature and work in philosophy of technology, science and technology studies, it's new to all of us in a way, and it's pretty vast. And it's also from the 90s and the 70s and the 80s. So there is a lot of it around, spread out across. The last thing I would think of as challenging is convincing reviewers that our core result, that performance improves, is for women, is novel and interesting. So we still haven't done this yet, which is why we are still in the process of getting the paper published. So I think communicating that more effectively is something which is quite challenging and we need to work on.
Sure, so that's kind of where the paper is now the most pressing current challenge in sort of framing the story and
that's right. Yeah,
yeah. I think it kind of sheds some light too on kind of the potentially the biases in kind of the structures that we work in, right? Where if it's findings about gender, it's like, well, don't we already know about that, and what is it? And so kind of pushing these boundaries in our own space as well, and sort of highlighting the importance of these issues.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can I can understand the challenge and the frustration there, but yeah, I wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
So for one last question, do you have any general advice or specific advice even for scholars that are looking to do responsible research, or even those that are specifically looking towards these sorts of awards for responsible research, like the OMT Responsible Research Award?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, we can't speak for the awards committee, like why how we won the award, but I think so. I mean, we think that we won this award because we suggest a possible solution, a technological solution to a really important problem, and we kind of depart from earlier literature in the sense we are focusing on technology as a solution to this problem of gender inequality. So among surgeons in particular, and our empirical setting is particularly well suited for us to address this question, and it's relatively narrow. So it's but at the same time, it's representative of a larger issue, which is gender inequality in the material conditions of the workplace. So in this way, we are able to make good progress on a problem which is very important, which is broader, which we see in society all around us, but in a relatively narrower setting, which addresses empirical challenges. while shining a light on this bigger, wider problem across organizations. So you'll see some variant of this problem across organizations, even if they're not hospitals.
Sure.
And so we addressed this problem through empirical work, because our skills are working with healthcare data sets, right? But clearly there is more work needed on qualitative data gathering and analysis, designing field experiments, so that we get thick, rich descriptions and inductive theorizing about what exactly is going on, what are the processes. Because I mentioned about this self-reinforcing cycle, which is dynamic. Mm-hmm. So we need to learn more about these processes leading to discrimination among men and women surgeons, or in general, broadly across organizations.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate your time, and all three of you for joining for this interview. I know OMT really appreciates it too. So we look forward to sharing this with our audience. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say before I close it out?
I just want to say thank you, Kristen. Thank you for taking the time to highlight the paper and to talk with us. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Of course.
Thanks, Kristen. It was great sharing our thoughts with you.
And thank you to the OMT group for awarding us this. It was very unexpected, but it's very humbling that people think it's really important. So we're gonna keep working on it.
Well, congratulations again. Certainly well deserved. And thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks, Kristen.